Oh, you're on mute, Carolyn.
We did a tech check. It always goes wrong. Still. Oh, there you go.
How about now? Oh, grand.
Yep.
Hooray! I got this fancy microphone, and it was sort of, sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's less helpful than more helpful. And I was going to say that I'm going to start by saying, one, thank you for the introduction, and two,
we lost you again.
Oh, there. You lost me again?
Wait, there you are. You're good.
I'm here. Okay, I'm not going to touch anything. I wear many hats, and in some of my hats, I am more artist, and in some, I'm more teacher, and you guys are getting more the artist. When I was thinking about talking to you guys and thinking about what travel means relative to inclusivity and to like my journey, I was like, I need to do the poet version of this talk because this just needs to be in that spirit. So I'm going to talk to you in a less instructive and more collaborative way, I guess, is probably how I would name that. So I'm really excited. So let me begin. I was thinking as I, came to this talk about travel, about being a world citizen. So during this talk today, we're going to travel a lot. We're going to talk about southern farmland and the Atlantic Ocean, and we're going to go to England and Mississippi and Nigeria and Russia, and we're going to go to the past, all in the spirit of living in a more hopeful and understanding present. Because this idea of being a world citizen and of getting to travel, it gets realer and more complicated every day. And we are all here gathered in this group today because we understand the ways in which travel transforms. And I think about you guys like you're in an organization that offers people access to a world that's past your own imagining, access to places of their wild dreaming. And to me, it's never been more important to be in the business of making us feel more connected geographically, spiritually, morally, by empowering us to find our way into new spaces and places at home and around the world. So as you heard in my bio, I'm a cookbook author, I'm a poet, I perform, I teach, and I'm going to be speaking to you from a vantage of some version of all of those positions at this point in the talk. But I'd like to start this conversation with my hopeful role as my role as a past and future traveler. So I'm going to read you a little travel bucket list that's just got some funny numbers with it for now. I've already visited a few of these places, but they're all places that I would like to visit again. The ones I visited, and there are places that I haven't, you'll hear about. So the list goes like this: England and Northwestern Europe, 24. Ireland, 17. Nigeria, 16. Cameroon, Congo, 13. Scotland, 10. Mali, 6. Senegal, 3. Ivory Coast, 2. Ghana, 2. Benin and Togo, 2. Nigeria, 2. The Bantu region, 2%. Sweden and Denmark, 1%. The Basque region, 1%. So many places I want to visit. So many parts of the world I want to know. This is not a ranked list of my interest in traveling to these different locations, nor are they numbers that reflect the demographics of some single in the world community. These numbers are the travel story of my in the blood community. Those are my ancestry DNA results. Why do I share them with you today? Because my body's travel story is also a complicated American story. As you heard, 53% of my genetic makeup is from Europe. And that number represents nearly every one of the ancestors to whom I'm related who came to the United States of their own free will and volition. The rest, the African part of this American, that was forced migration. Now, when I was growing up, there were whispers and stories on both my mother and father's side that we might have had some American Indian ancestors. But science has dispelled that part of my family's mythology. So I sit here before you as a Black American woman whose body comes from some 15 plus countries around the world. None of them, my body doesn't belong intrinsically to any one geography. Most of ours don't. Our bodies are atlases. My body's story is a story of travel and a story of hard truths. As Maura alluded to at the beginning of this talk, and I actually decided to include some of that article in this talk today because I was thinking that it fit with what my concerns thinking about Juneteenth are. I am here in large part, I started doing public speaking, sort of launched into that because of an essay I wrote for the New York Times in 2020, right around this time of year, actually. I wrote in reaction to the death of George Floyd and some of the subsequent public outcry in the middle of what was, a burgeoning, broader crisis across the globe. And the article, I wrote it as an act of witnessing, and it found an audience. Everything I do these days really has become a kind of call and response. In that moment, the world was crying out, and the article was my response. My words became a call, and I continue to be moved by the voices that have returned to me, moved by what I wrote. And in the spirit of continuing the tradition of call and response, I'm going to share this piece with you now. My body is a Confederate monument. I have rape-colored skin. My light brown blackness is a living testament to the rules, the practices, the causes of the Old South. If there are those who want to remember the legacy of the Confederacy, if they want monuments, well then, my body is a monument. My skin is a monument. Dead Confederates are honored all over this country with cartoonish private statues, solemn public monuments, and even in the names of United States Army bases. It fortifies and heartens me to witness the protests against this practice and the growing clamor from public servants to redress it. But there is a difference between rewriting and reframing the past. I say it is not a matter of airbrushing history, but of adding a new perspective. I'm a Black Southern woman, and of my immediate white male ancestors, all of them were rapists. My very existence is a relic of slavery and Jim Crow. According to the rule of hypodescent, the social and legal practice of assigning a genetically mixed race person to the race with less social power, I am the daughter of 2 Black people, the granddaughter of 4 Black people, the great-granddaughter of 8 Black people. Go back one more generation and it gets less straightforward and more sinister. As far as family history has always told, and as modern DNA testing has allowed me to confirm, I am the descendant of Black women who were domestic servants and white men who raped their help. It is an extraordinary truth of my life that I am biologically more than half white, and yet I have no white people in my genealogy and living memory. No voluntary whiteness. I'm more than half white, and none of it was consensual. White Southern men, my ancestors, took what they wanted from women they did not love, over whom they had extraordinary power, and then failed to claim their children. What is a monument but a standing memory? An artifact to make tangible the truth of the past. My body and blood are a tangible truth of the South and its past. The Black people I come from were owned by the white people I come from. The white people I come from fought and died for their lost cause. And I ask you now, who dares to tell me to celebrate them? Who dares to ask me to accept their mounted pedestals? You cannot dismiss me as someone who doesn't understand. You cannot say it wasn't my family members who fought and died. My Blackness does not put me on the other side of anything. It puts me squarely at the heart of the debate. I don't just come from the South. I come from Confederates. I've got rebel gray blue blood coursing my veins. My great-grandfather Will was raised with the knowledge that Edmund Pettus was his father, Pettis, the storied Confederate general, the grand dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, the man for whom Selma's bloody Sunday Bridge is named. So I'm not an outsider who makes these demands. I am a great-great-granddaughter. And here I am called to say that there is much about the South that is precious to me. I do my best teaching and writing here. There is, however, a peculiar model of Southern pride that must now, at long last, be reckoned with. This is not an ignorant pride, but a defiant one. It is a pride that says, our history is rich, our causes are justified, our ancestors lie beyond reproach. It is a pining for greatness, if you will, a wish again for a certain kind of American memory, a monument-worthy memory. But here's the thing. Our ancestors don't deserve your unconditional pride. Yes, I am proud of every one of my Black ancestors who survived slavery. They earned that pride by any decent person's reckoning. But I am not proud of the white ancestors whom I know, by virtue of my very existence, to be bad actors. Among the apologists for the Southern cause and for its monuments, there are those who dismiss the hardships of the past. They imagine a world of benevolent masters and speak with misty eyes of gentility and honor in the land. They deny plantation rape, or explain it away, or question the degree of frequency with which it occurred. To those people, it is my privilege to say, I am proof. I am proof that whatever else the South might have been or might believe itself to be, it was and is a space whose prosperity and sense of romance and nostalgia were built upon the grievous exploitation of Black life. The dream version of the Old South never existed. Any manufactured monument to that time in that place tells half a truth at best. The ideas and ideals it purports to honor are not real. To those who have embraced these delusions, now is the time to re-examine your position. Either you have been blind to a truth that my body's story forces you to see, or you really do mean to honor the oppressors at the expense of the oppressed, and you must at last acknowledge your emotional investment in a legacy of hate. Either way, I say the monuments of stone and metal, the monuments of cloth and wood, all the man-made monuments must come down. I defy any sentimental Southerner to defend our ancestors to me. I'm quite literally made of the reasons to strip them of their laurels. So thank you for letting me share that with you. And in order to weave some of what I've been thinking about lately into that together with what I was thinking about as I thought of coming into y'all's space to celebrate Juneteenth, I'd like to share with you a concept that I've been grappling with, exploring, talking to my students about, making them help me figure out what we mean by it. This term that I've been contemplating for a few years now, consensual reality. It's not my term. I first came across it in Anne Fadiman's book, The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. Great book if you haven't read it, where she quotes the terrific insight of another brilliant woman, California-based psychologist Suki Waller, who I believe coined the phrase. It's hard to pin down a single definition of consensual reality, but to me, it's the most productive and tangible outcome of a collective empathy exercise, like, say, the democratic experiment we're all living through. To me, consensual reality is not simply about acknowledging that the truth can look different from different perspectives, but to understand that our methods of analyzing and receiving the truth impact the nature of what we glean from it. Working towards consensual reality, the terms we can all agree on, really invites us to push past bias into harder questions about how we re-examine our position. It's about how we invite ourselves, not just to acknowledge our own blind spots, but to consider more carefully the ways in which other people see the world. It's Dr. Du Bois's double consciousness put to good, empathetic use. It's about building mechanisms that allow us to hold space for another person's sense of truth to make sense to us, and then build bridges back to one another. We achieve consensual reality by working to understand the nature of the other person's truth and then finding a place to fundamentally connect, because there's got to be somewhere. And that is the essential point from which productive relationships can move forward, from which effective leaders guide those they lead. And ultimately, we establish consensual reality by activating empathy, and we can make choices that create trust and really do serve the collective community, even when as complicated, strange, and wild as the world that we are living in right now, and of which we are so many dynamic parts. So what does all of this have to do with Juneteenth? Well, I come to you today with what I have been calling Juneteenth energy. I want it on a t-shirt. I'm hoping I'll figure that out sometime this year. Juneteenth energy is just the spirit that good news might come late, but it's still good news. And as I've contemplated this day, Juneteenth is forthcoming. What I've grappled with most is the question of how to make the most of good news, even if it's late. Can y'all hear me? Oh, good. Just making sure. I'm paranoid. I just thought I'd check in. Thank you. Apologies. Thank you. As I've contemplated this day, what I've grappled with the most is the question of how to make the most of good news when it comes, even if it's late. Enslaved people across the American South, as you know, had been legally freed by the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862. Slavery became illegal in all of the United States in January of 1865. The Civil War ended in early May of that same year, and yet the news of freedom did not formally come to Texas until June 19th. They were free and didn't know. And there can be a bitterness that comes when you ration the truth. Now, as a woman who's authored a cookbook, I am invested in serving up full helpings of sustenance, of truth. As a Black American woman, something obsessed with the past, I spend a lot of my time working to fill in lost stories, to get to that consensual reality, what really happened relative to what the books say happened, in order to get a clearer picture of the truth. As an educator and a writer, that means turning those freshly discovered truths into art, a reframe, if you will. Not a rewriting of the past, but a revisiting so that we might understand it better. It's the work of remembering, not redefining, but expanding definitions. Now, in a slightly wild but important pivot, I'd like you all to travel with me briefly through time and geographical space to Russia, to Stalin's Russia to be specific, to meet a poet called Anna Akhmatova. In Requiem, her collection about the horrors of living through Stalin's regime, she shares a memory in lieu of a preface to her poetry. I'm going to share that with you now. During the terrifying years of the Yazov repressions, I spent 17 months in Leningrad prison lines. One time, someone thought they recognized me. Then a woman standing behind me, who of course had never heard my name, stirred from her own, though common to us all, stupor, and asked in my ear, their all-spoken whispers, "Could you describe this?" And I said, "I can." Then something akin to a smile slipped across what once had been her face. Akhmatova wrote that on April 1st, 1957, in Leningrad. Could you describe this? Gives me chills. That passage is the reason I'm a writer. That's off the record. That sounds a lot to me like the perennial and also somehow irresistibly old school church question, can I get a witness? And then comes the work of the artist, or in my case, the writer, and the question shifts slightly. The question comes, can I be a witness? Because for a writer, it's just like the Russian woman asked Akhmatova, can I describe this? Can I tell it so that it rings right to the others who've lived it? Can I offer that precious relief that comes with feeling seen and not alone? There is agency of the telling of a thing. We all need witnesses. We get through struggles by hunting down the truth, whether we're traveling across time or space and pulling it into the light with our heads held high. So speaking of hunting down the truth and learning to be a witness, I'm now going to bring you back across the ocean with me to Mississippi, and then we're going to go to England. I just want to make sure you guys have an itinerary. After I graduated from college, I spent 2 years teaching public school in Sunflower County, Mississippi. And then, because Mississippi is a place that gets in your bones, I realized that I had to stay there longer. I had more witnessing to do. I had to become a real writer so that I could look at the people around me and say to them, yes, I can describe this. I can write this for you. I will be a witness. So in August of 2012, I enrolled in the creative writing program at the University of Mississippi in order to do what I thought was my Mississippi witnessing, my witnessing of my life, that hard story of my body that I told in my article. And I somehow found myself obsessing over Shakespeare. More specifically, while sitting in an Oxford, Mississippi bar, trying to parse out my genetic identity relative to these American stories I was telling, I was looking at the Dark Lady sonnets, and I got it into my head that Shakespeare had a black lover, and that this woman was the subject of sonnets 127 to 154. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm putting on my professor hat for a little bit here. Those sonnets have been called the Dark Lady sonnets for quite a while now because of their focus, in contrast to the preceding 126, which are addressed to a fair youth and a rival poet, on a woman who consistently figures as dark or black when Shakespeare describes her. Duncan Salkeld, a professor of English at the University of Chichester, put me on to the idea. I'd never met him. I discovered his work the way I discover much of the news in my life, or used to, from one of Britain's most disreputable newspapers, the Daily Mail. The article, dubiously titled, "Was Bard's Lady a Woman of Ill Repute?" It piqued my interest, so much so that I hunted Dr. Salkeld down online, and I wrote to him. Perhaps the best way I can describe Dr. Salkeld's reply to my query is to say that he seemed happily chagrined. The volumes that backed up his discovery were these Elizabethan prison records from the late 16th century, and he wrote to me that the original documents are held at Bethlem Royal Hospital in Beckenham, Kent, and that they will allow you to see them by appointment. If you came to England, we could make a visit there. So I did. I went. I flew to England in May of 2013 from Oxford, Mississippi, to meet Professor Salkeld, and I met the Dark Lady. It's an easy train from London to Chichester. I got on the train at Paddington Station. I disembarked in Chichester in this quiet university town. I sat down to wait at the little coffee shop. I pulled Dr. Salkeld's book out of my bag, positioned myself over it, trying to look studious. And the man himself peered through the glass doors of the cafe. He waved at me. I knew it had to be him, a creditable picture of whom I could not find online for two reasons. One, because the combined effect of his glasses, tweed coat, gray sweater, thinning hair was deeply professorial. And then the second reason was that there could hardly be more than one man of this model coming to the train station in search of a Black American girl with wild hair and high-heeled boots and a suitcase and a Shakespeare book, a girl who looked like me. Now, if you humor me for just a moment longer, we're going to do a deep nerd dive. I'm going to tell you about paleography for 2 seconds. It is the study of handwriting styles that are no longer in use. Dr. Salkeld is an expert of paleography. That was the skill that allowed him to uncover details of Black Luce, the Dark Lady's story that had somehow been missed for centuries. Going through the Bridewell prison records where notorious Madam Black Luce, who Dr. Salkeld believes is the Dark Lady from Shakespeare sonnets, he found them through his study of paleography. And the remnants of Bridewell prison that he was perusing remain where they sat during Shakespeare's time in Clerkenwell, and now somewhat gentrified bit of central London that in the 16th century served as a red light district. And the prison played host to like all manner of colorful Elizabethans, from maidservants who'd lost the washing to men found in bed with their neighbors' wives. And this makes the prison records, which most of which are verbatim accounts of the injured party's grievances, lively reading, if you can read them. And nobody had transcribed them until Dr. Salkeld put himself to work. So his insights into Black Luce's life as a madam are the result of his years spent painstakingly bearing witness to her, transcribing the 4 remaining volumes of the prison's records. And I say remaining volumes because originally there were 5, which we know by the numbering on their inner covers, 1, 2, 3, 5. Legend has it that when London was burning in 1666, the record books were thrown out of the top floor windows of the prison onto barges that passed by on the Thames, and that one volume missed its mark and lies to this day at the bottom of the river. That's neither here nor there. When Dr. Salkeld and I parted ways toward the end of May, I was thrilled and disappointed in equal measure. I was thrilled to have confidence as I revisited my hunt through the sonnets for fragments that might lead me to some insight into how Shakespeare viewed the Black female form, thrilled to find new language to describe myself. I was disappointed because in the end, all he could really do was conjecture and suspect. As he put it, the mystery of the Dark Lady continues to remain dark, though the question of her historical identity is unlikely to go away. That felt too dry for me. I felt beset by the weight of that uncertainty. So I went back to the original works, to the Dark Lady sonnets, and I took them in a book with me back to Mississippi with the intention of finding enough evidence that I might be satisfied. Shakespeare's words had been enough for me to send me to England to hunt Lucy down, and I would make them enough again. So all of that to say, I wrote a book about Black Luce. I wrote a book about a Black woman who owned a brothel in Elizabethan England because I was living in my Black body in a complicated American space. I was reckoning with truths I'd seen in Mississippi, and I had to leave the country mentally and physically to figure out how to bear witness to what was happening in this space I live in here. I had to think about, recontemplate how questions of agency and power work, how the white gaze on my Black body worked, and make some peace and find some new truth, some new beauty in the dark. I wrote that book because I needed a witness. I wrote that book because Black Luce needed a witness. I wrote that book because I wanted to feel included in the canon. I needed the canon to be inclusive, and I had to will a space for myself. It's easy to invite someone to come be different in front of you, to teach you something, to make you feel cultured or cultural, engaged or engaging. It's terribly, terribly hard work to make an othered stranger feel welcomed into a shared fold. You have to be willing to talk about hard things and take a bunch of strangers on a journey all over the world. Now, I fell in love with Shakespeare because there is this sense of universality, what Zadie Smith called his irreducible multiplicity to his body of work. He was concerned with inclusion. But when I found Black Luce, I experienced the work as inclusive of me. That is to say, I didn't just see him gesturing toward the notion that everyone ought to be included. I saw him actively including a representation of my sense of who I was. That was at first a purely joyful revelation, to find out that he knew it all after all. And I went right back to the sonnets with this fire, and I looked to all the places that I might be able to now see myself. And I found her. He said, "My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow out of her head. You can't tell me that wasn't a Black girl." He said, "Then will I swear that beauty herself is black, and all they foul that thy complexion lack." But he also said some things that hurt. He wrote, "In faith I do not love thee with mine eyes, for they in thee 1,000 errors note." That's that consensual reality part, figuring out how to bear witness to the different kinds of truths that can come out of people's mouths. Being inclusive, it hurts. It implies former exclusion. And whoever it was that used to be left out, well, we are bound to have some grievances, which makes conversations hard. And if you're going to put your money where your mouth is about being inclusive, you have to get right with those grievances, maybe even atone for them, engage in some self-examination and reproach. Being inclusive requires a new answer to old questions and an apology for an old approach. And that new answer is the act of witnessing. I loved Shakespeare all my life. When I found out he might have a Black girlfriend, I decided it must be true, and I wrote a book about it. In my book, there are poems that I wrote before I discovered Lucy or Dr. Salkeld or his work to remind myself of how much I needed Lucy, or just the idea of her, before I even knew she existed. Because I knew I needed that inclusion, and I couldn't name it. I claimed representation in the canon by being a witness for a woman from another place and another time, and it was an act of repair. I traveled to England, and I found a new way to look at home. The act of witnessing is not just a respite. It's a balm against injustice. We make art to show we've lived and how. Now, I've written that my body is a Confederate monument, but really I live my life in a body that I call to myself a body politic, with a K. The term came almost as a joke. It came to me tongue in cheek. It came sort of as a bent nose, we call it in the blues, or a nudge, but also an unreachable itch. I'm obviously interested, albeit distantly, in the sort of medieval definition of a body politic as the people of a nation, state, or society considered collectively as an organized group of citizens. Because of the ways in which my body, my genetic makeup, and my appearance complicate the story of how that is supposed to be understood in America, in our body politic. But I'm more interested in the notion of how my body's story makes me reconsider or reframe the notion of realpolitik, the systems of politics or principles based on practical rather than moral or ideological concerns. Because the fact of the matter is that the practical principles of my life are based on what I consider to be the failures of the moral and ideological considerations of the people and ruling structures of the place of the country in which I live. When I wrote that my body was a Confederate monument, I was getting to that point. When I wrote a Black woman's life into the mythology of the great bard himself, I was getting to that point. Living in my body as a monument, as a part of the American body politic, continually forces me to consider questions through the lens of realpolitik. It's the mutant child of Dr. Du Bois's double consciousness in a way. It's not to see myself twice, but to see the world for what it is rather than what it says it is, in order to actually survive it, and then maybe to help it better understand itself. We can hold two truths together at once. My body is a Confederate monument and a miraculous musical machine. My body is of halls of presumed and ill-got power, and my body is of the middle passage. We must hold two truths together at once. In another life, when I've got on another one of my hats, I am a cookbook author. I love food. It is a privilege of my life to feel a certain joy or even luxuriousness and comfort in the notion of farm to table, nose to tail eating. I co-authored a cookbook that's also a memoir with my mother, and it's a love note to my experience of Black food and Black womanhood and Black stories, and an offering to the conversation that seeks to restore and expand our food history. Now, writing poetry about food in the same geographical space, serving the same purpose with the same body story, is somehow harder. I'm going to share a poem with you now that appeared in the Oxford American, I think 2 years ago. This poem is called, it's a poem by me. This poem is called A Sustainable Call and Response. What are you asking us to want? What are you expecting our bodies will remember. Here, let me put it another way. You say farm to, I say field hand. You say fresh produce, I say strange fruit. You say back to the basics, back to the land, I say return. Return unto us our stolen acres. Give us our land back again. How shall we revisit a stolen thing? What harvest invites us home, and our hands' blood still soaked to every now decorative plow? Our pastures with a pen stroke turned to someone else's flock. I say no. I say we have left your not yours farms for seats at tables. Our ability to sustain ourselves is our sustenance. Your sustainables come always and too often at our expense. And well, priority is as priority does, so call me a resource, sugar. Put me on your list of things you hope endure. Food and the land and certain kinds of earthy foodways. Well, for many Southerners, for many Black Americans, these are not such straightforward or aspirational things. In the land of strange fruit, a tree can fast become a gallows, a farm, a labor camp, a prison, the favorite family room, a kitchen, can be the site of so many body transgressed traumas. And so too it goes for travel. What does it mean to cross an ocean women jumped into to avoid a fate worse than death? What does it mean to contemplate visiting a country your family left against their will? What does it mean to visit the towering spires built from the spoils of conquest? What does it mean to walk into a museum and see precious relics from a culture many miles, thousands of miles away? I am still struck breathless at the beauty of so many things that have hard histories. We can hold two things together at once. We make art to stop forgetting. We travel to know more than we knew before. And that is how we hold those truths together. But it is infinitely easier when we are surrounded by empathetic minds seeking consensual reality and working to hold our myriad of perspectives alongside their own. So make no mistake, we are living through a complicated and seismic moment. It is writing itself on America's DNA. For 155 years, Juneteenth was an oft-silenced celebration. At long last, it is a national holiday. That is good news, even if it's late. We celebrate Juneteenth because it was a day that brought good news. And like the day it celebrates, the nationalizing was late, but it came. And there was a time I thought it wouldn't. Because of the way that I remember, because of the way that I understood the truth. But I am here today with hope for the future, because sometimes we do still get surprised with good news. We travel around the world to expand, and we find new insight and intimacy somehow in the witnessing of that breadth and that scope. So here is to being fellow travelers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful. I want to give you all some time if you have things you'd like to talk about or ask Ms. Williams about her experiences. I'm going to actually start. I'm just introducing myself here. So I think drawing from your experiences in so many different spaces and mediums, maybe especially from your teaching experiences in Mississippi, are there common markers for identifying a lack of inclusion or strategies that you recommend for being proactively inclusive when you enter a space for the first time?
It's funny. I started a company, a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy in 2020 with a couple of friends. I'm the resident poet, 2 MBAs, 1 educational doctorate person, and we get paid to teach people about inclusivity in their companies, like these long workshops. And I don't do them anymore because because it's so, I think we want a formula that we can apply in order to help us become better at this. And I think that the only answer, and that's part of why I give these talks, they're so chaotic. Like, I love writing these speeches. I'm like, how am I putting it all together? But I think that that's the answer, is accepting that things that you don't think go together just sometimes do. And then leaving room to stand to that. It's like, that's the hallmark of inclusive spaces to me, is a willingness to just try and hold as many truths together at once as you can. And to be surprised by other people's truth, and then and seeking common ground. I think those are the hallmarks of effectively inclusive spaces. And I think, there are the obvious answers are, we talk about in my company, which I didn't want to just give you a company spiel, but I'm happy to tell you that.
Please do.
But I'm happy to say that we talk about the spectrum of inclusion. Like, if somebody is effectively included, they feel safe, they feel like they have agency, they feel respected, and they also feel effective in what they do, right? And so they're not just, and so it's like, we talk about DBIE like they're different verticals, but really, like, diversity is the first step towards inclusivity. If equity, equity is the goal, an equitable environment, right? And diversity is step 1. You cannot be inclusive if you don't have a diverse group of people to include. But diversity just means, oh, well, we got people from different backgrounds into a shared space. But then you have to make sure that they, once you have to make sure they feel included, which requires safety, agency, respect, and efficacy. And then you have to work towards figuring out how you, once they feel included, is there repair? Is there justice that needs to be undertaken to rectify imbalances? It's like, if you name it and you make them feel included, but you don't rectify things that are wrong or biases that have been manifesting themselves, then the inclusivity is really only receiving lip service, right? Like, if we're not going, oh, well, we've made the women in this company feel included, and now we've been able to identify that they're not getting paid at the same rate, or whatever it is, justice has to follow inclusion. And that's that requires adjustment. And then, then we have equity. So it's about, inclusion is an important step on the bridge to an equitable space and place. But I think it looks so different depending, because I'm often the only Black person in white spaces. I feel very included because there are parts of my life that are very informed by primarily white institutions. I went to Montessori school, and then private school, and then prep school in New Hampshire, and then Harvard. I'm very comfortable in white spaces. That's not because the white spaces are good at including me. It's just because I was raised in them. And so, me figuring out how to be included is different from a Black person who doesn't have that a person of any kind of otherness who doesn't have that context and lived experience. And so part of it is just understanding the scope of necessary types of diversity also. And also just And that witnessing work, like people who speak up for not themselves, those are environments where people take up for other people besides themselves. Those are often, that's a hallmark of inclusive environment too. It's a much longer answer than I expected to give, but I don't give those talks anymore because you try and teach people that, and then they're like, what does justice look like? And how does that integrate into our, quarterly plan? And what's the work schedule for that? And how do I write it into my direct reports, performance evaluation? And I'm like, oh God, never mind. My soul just died. I'm going to go write some more poems.
Can I ask just, this is out of my personal curiosity, what were some of the responses that you got from Lucy Negro Redux? Were people excited to have that level, like see that level of inclusion in Shakespeare's work, or like was there some resistance to that idea?
If there was, I have not encountered it. Like it was really an extraordinary. I think that's one of the interesting things again about the spaces that I find myself working in, which is like ballet and Shakespeare are both like very white art forms. And so everyone was like just so relieved, I think, that their field was now joining the 21st century of like attempting to bring on board these new narratives. And so everyone was like, that's, when I wrote that book, it was this tiny thing that has wound up just opening my world so wildly. Because I was sitting there, that article, the Confederate Monument piece began as a poem that's in Lucy Negro, because I was just trying to figure out like, how the hell am I half white when I don't have any Black relatives? And like, what does that mean? Like what does that say about these men that I'm related to? And, I'm married to a white man myself now. And like, what does it mean to like accept the loving gaze of a white man in this Southern space in the face of all of that hard history? And I really needed to not be thinking about that relative to America. And then I was like, Shakespeare said, if hairs be wires, black wires grow out of her head. And I was like, maybe I can look to Shakespeare to think about this differently. And then I can look at it in an American context with fresh eyes, right? And so all of that to say, I think I dare anyone to tell me that I shouldn't try that out. Do you know what I mean? Like that, I have not encountered, and also I have the luxury of having an MFA instead of a PhD. And so I get to like wildly surmise and live in my imagination in ways that my colleagues at Vanderbilt, I'm a full-time professor at Vanderbilt is like my other thing that I do. But my colleagues that are, in the social sciences or in the, in the English department, who have to, you can't publish something that's not a certain fact with evidence if you have a doctorate. But I am a creative writer, so I can just say that Lucy was Shakespeare's girlfriend and that's my truth and put it in a book. And that's a wild luxury and that's where art allows you to expand people's imagination sort of differently in a way that's very freeing. And I think it's had a wonderfully positive response. People have been mostly on the side of people want to be on the right side of history for the most part. And so, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah. Do we have any questions from anyone for Ms. Williams?
I'll answer questions about anything. I also yell about politics sometimes on MSNBC. So you're welcome to ask me. We're not on live television, so I'll say whatever I think, actually, if you want. Although I mostly will just say it might be the apocalypse. So I'm sorry.
New questions. Oh, wait, Laura, you have a question?
First, thank you so much for taking your time today and sharing. I found your approach on talking about the travel and starting with your DNA very fascinating and really resonated with me. So thank you. It was a very cool take on it. But so my question to you is, as we talk about the things that we need to do, I mean, a white female, often think about what my race needs to do. Um, is there one particular culture or race that you feel um, is more reluctant to diversity and inclusion, or is it just an all around thing? And then what can we do to help educate? I mean, obviously having those uncomfortable conversations, but to your point, they're uncomfortable. So how do we start having those? How do we move the marker forward?
So, this is something that I have never put in a speech because maybe it's because it's one step too uncomfortable for me, but when people ask me this question, I always do say it. So maybe I need to just write about it a little bit more. You know what's the reluctant question? I think that I would hesitate to answer that definitively because there's actually probably data on that in some way that and so I don't want to just hypothesize. What I will say is that people who come from the dominant societal group that has the most social and political power, tend to not want to give it up because that's normal. People don't want to give up power when they have it. Like that's, it's not, it takes, you have to have a certain kind of moral fortitude to want to give away power, or to redistribute it if you were born with a lot of it and other people say they don't have it. But, but to your other point of like, how do we have the hard conversations? What does that look like? And they're hard. The one piece that I like to tell people is, and people in your position, i.e., white people in, Western spaces where they are representing the social class, the social cultural class with the group with the power, is talk to, part of the work is making sure you're being inclusive of the people who are other around you. But a huge part of the work that is like an untapped exercise is like going and talking to like your relatives, the ones that you don't talk to and you know which ones they are, who like don't agree, and like, who you don't bring up the complicated stuff at dinner with them. Cause like, I can't get to them. Like I don't want to put myself in that position. Like it's hard enough to be vulnerable in front of people who are ready to hear it, like who are not from my background. And then and the labor of changing the intimate minds of like the conservative family members, that is like, it's the one you want to do least. Cause like, every one of my friends, not everyone, but like I said, I went to prep school in New Hampshire and then Harvard. Like a lot of my friends are white people and they're all like, what can I do? And I'm like, get your cousin. Like, remember how you were so proud that you didn't go to Thanksgiving last year because they're, so-and-so was awful and voted for whomever. Go to Thanksgiving. That's what I need you to do. Like, I don't need you to go to the BLM march. I need you to go to Thanksgiving with your grandpa and make him vote for somebody else. Like, you're the only one who can do it.
But then that requires us to educate ourselves too, right?
Yes, but even the exercise of like sitting together and saying we need to learn more, because I'm pretty sure but I can tell you, like, read Isabel Wilkerson, read Ibrahim X. Kendi, like there's like, like the how to be an anti-racist is a great place to start. Like there's all sorts of there are all sorts of really there's all sorts of wonderful reading lists, like, but to me the moral and the moral and ideological position of saying we have a lot more to learn, and like we are voting with people who do not represent our beliefs. It's like when you that part, and that we want to be new students. That's like that heart position is the thing that needs more modeling, because we're always all going to have so much to learn, right? Like, and so to me, it's not really about like it. I mean, of course it's important, the knowledge that you gather, but the standpoint of saying I am determined to learn more, and I want to be a person who that makes people feel welcome. You know, like that's sort of the baseline. And I think that helping people come to that kind of open mind, as opposed to perfecting the knowledge base, that's sort of where I've landed on my journey of educating about this. Because I'm like, there are people that are better read than I am, and there are people that are better at gathering the statistics than I am. But what I can do is like sit in a room where many truths together are held. And that's like, and that to me is the part that I feel like I can offer to others most, impactfully, if that makes sense. But I love that question, Laura. And I'll send Maura a link to I have a little list of reading if you want it. I can send you.
Yes, actually,
I'm happy to send you some books. There's some great Tima Jones and Kenneth Okun and their list of the elements of white supremacy. If you haven't encountered that is a really iconic. The website's interactive. It is really helpful. It broke my brain because I was like, oh my God, I've been bowing to these rules that aren't not for me for so long, but it's also very restorative and empowering to read them.
Yeah, I was going to mention I have a list of readings and resources to send out after this, but please send me whatever you have. I'd love to send that out to you. Thank you so much for being here. It's absolutely delightful. I'm personally very excited that you accepted the invite. I love your cookbook. There's a cookbook, you all should get it. It's amazing. Not just a collection of recipes, but also stories, and it's wonderful. But thank you again so much for being with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And shameless plug, there's also a TV show sort of cookbook adjacent about social justice and food and appropriation versus appreciation. It's called Hungry for Answers. It's on HBO. It's on Max, whatever that's called now. Yay.
Making a note. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. I appreciate your time. Go
Thank
back
you guys
to the grind.
so much. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.